My name is Michael Carter, I'm 34 years old, and if there's one truth I've lived my entire life with, it's this. My father never saw me for who I was. Growing up, it always felt like I was a guest in my own family, a background character in a play where my older brother, Andrew, was the star. I was the quiet one, the one who worked hard, the one who stayed out of trouble, and yet somehow, I was always the disappointment. You see, my father, Richard Carter, was a man who believed in appearances more than substance. He was old-fashioned, stern, and to him, success was measured in big gestures, shiny trophies, and loud applause. Andrew gave him that. Andrew was the quarterback in high school, the one who brought home medals, the one everyone cheered for. I was just Michael, the kid who sat in his room, read books, and helped Mom with the dishes. As the years passed, that imbalance only grew. Andrew got into a good college, thanks to Dad cashing out part of his retirement savings to cover tuition. I went to community college while working part-time jobs, and I never once asked for help. Andrew failed out within a year, but still, Dad spoke of him like he was destined for greatness. Meanwhile, when I graduated quietly with honors and took a job in accounting, it was brushed off as average. It didn't matter what I did. When Andrew bought a car he couldn't afford, Dad bragged about it to anyone who would listen. When I paid off my student loans early, Dad didn't even ask how I managed. It was like being invisible, and not the kind of invisible where no one sees you, but the kind where they see you standing there, but you're never worth talking about. But here's the cruel irony. When things went wrong, when bills piled up, when debt swallowed my parents whole, when Andrew's recklessness drained every last penny of my father's savings, guess who they turned to? It started small. A phone call from Mom, late at night, saying the electric bill was overdue. I paid it without a word. Then it was a medical bill, then tuition for my sister's kids, then credit card debt that my parents didn't want to admit they had. Over 9 years, I quietly became the lifeline of the Carter family. I paid off tax debts, I covered mortgages, I made sure their house wasn't taken by the bank. I was the invisible safety net beneath the people who treated me as if I was nothing. And I never said a word. Maybe because part of me still wanted that approval. Maybe I thought that someday when Dad saw the truth, he'd look at me differently. Maybe he'd be proud. Maybe I'd stop being the failure in his eyes. That day never came. Instead, I learned to live with it. I built a life for myself in the shadows. I became good at my job, moved up the ladder, started investing quietly, saved money, bought a small condo. My father never asked how I was doing, never once asked about my work or my dreams. For him, Andrew was still the golden child, despite being nearly 40 and bouncing between jobs, girlfriends, and bad investments. It hurt. God, it hurt. But pain has a way of teaching you patience. It teaches you to hold your breath, to wait, to watch. And then came the night of my father's 60th birthday. It was supposed to be a celebration, a huge one. My mother rented out a banquet hall, invited more than 50 relatives, old friends, co-workers. It was a spectacle, exactly the kind of thing Dad loved. A stage, a microphone, an audience. He thrived on it. I remember walking in, feeling the weight of all those eyes, the buzz of conversation, the laughter. Tables were filled with cousins, aunts, uncles, people I hadn't seen in years. And as I walked to my table in the corner, I knew already how the night would go. Andrew was there, of course, in a flashy suit he probably couldn't afford, shaking hands like a politician, smiling wide. He looked like the hero of the family. People swarmed him, clapped him on the back, asked about his projects. He dodged the questions smoothly, the way a con man does, but nobody seemed to notice. Dad certainly didn't. He beamed with pride every time Andrew opened his mouth. I was barely acknowledged. A few polite nods, a few, "Oh, hi, Michael." That was it. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and then, of course, the moment came. Dad stood up, holding his glass of champagne, his voice booming across the hall. "Tonight," he said, "I want to thank all of you for being here. 60 years, that's a long time. I've had my share of ups and downs, but one thing I've always been proud of is my family." I sat there, listening, already knowing where this was going. He raised his glass toward Andrew. This is the son who made me proud. The one who's always chased his dreams, who never settled, who I know will achieve great things. Andrew, you're the reason I can hold my head high." The crowd erupted in applause. Andrew grinned, lifting his glass, soaking in the glory. And then my father turned to me. "And then there's Michael," he said, his tone shifting, his smile fading. He chuckled, and the chuckle spread into the room like wildfire. "What can I say? Well, he's never really achieved much. But he's here, and that counts for something." Laughter. Real, loud laughter. From uncles, cousins, even some people I considered friends. I sat frozen. My face burned. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. 9 years. 9 years of paying their bills, saving their house, keeping them afloat, and this was what I got. A joke. A humiliation. I said nothing. I smiled faintly, put my glass down, and sat through the rest of the night in silence. When it ended, I walked out without a word. The next morning, I woke to 38 missed calls. The morning after the birthday party, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was the alarm. But when I blinked awake and reached for it, I saw the screen flashing a number I knew too well, my mother's. 38 missed calls. 38. I sat there for a moment in the half-light of dawn, staring at that number, feeling the weight of it. In all the years I had lived away from home, not once had my parents called me that many times in one night. Birthdays, holidays, even when my grandmother passed away, there were maybe 3 for calls at most. But 38? That was desperation. I didn't answer. Instead, I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The humiliation from the night before replayed in my mind like a broken record. My father's voice echoing, his words cutting into me like glass. He's never really achieved much. The laughter, the smirks, the way Andrew soaked in the spotlight. I had swallowed it then, but in the silence of my apartment, the anger burned hotter than ever. I got up, made coffee, went about my morning routine as if nothing had happened. But my phone kept buzzing. Mom, Dad, even Andrew. Texts started pouring in. "Michael, please answer. We need to talk. Your father didn't mean it like that. Don't take it so seriously. Where are you?" Each message stoked the fire inside me. Didn't mean it like that? How else could you mean it? He had stood in front of 50 people and reduced me to a punchline. I didn't reply. By noon, I finally glanced at my voicemail. There were 15 messages, each one a little more frantic than the last. Mom's voice cracked with guilt. "Michael, honey, please just pick up. Your father, he was just joking. He didn't realize." Dad's voice, stern but uneasy. "Michael, you can't just storm off like that. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." That one made me laugh out loud. I embarrassed him? The man who humiliated me in front of a crowd thought he was the victim. Andrew's message came next, smug and dismissive. "Come on, bro, don't be so sensitive. You know how Dad is. It was just a toast. Lighten up." Lighten up. That was Andrew in a nutshell. Float through life, laugh at everyone else's expense, and never once take responsibility. I deleted the messages without finishing them. But silence has a way of making people squirm, and as the days passed, the calls didn't stop. They multiplied. Friends of the family started reaching out. Cousins messaged me, asking what had happened. Some of them admitted, quietly, that they thought Dad had gone too far. A few even apologized on his behalf. And then, something I didn't expect happened. My father's empire began to show cracks. It started with a call from my cousin, who worked at a local bank. He mentioned, offhandedly, that he'd seen my father in the branch more than usual. "He seemed stressed," he said. "Like really stressed. I thought he was solid financially, but is everything okay with him?" I didn't answer. Because I knew. I had been quietly patching the holes in my father's finances for years. Without me, the leaks were starting to show. The second sign came from my mother. She called again, her voice low, almost trembling. "Michael, we need to talk. Your father's under a lot of pressure right now. Things aren't as stable as we thought." I said nothing. Just listened. Let her fill the silence. She went on about bills piling up, about late notices, About how Dad was talking about selling the lake cabin. That cabin was his pride and joy, the place he boasted about to his friends as proof of his success. The idea of him letting it go? That meant things were dire. But I didn't offer to help. Not this time. Meanwhile, Andrew kept playing the Golden Sun. He posted photos from expensive dinners, golf outings, weekend trips. Always smiling, always flaunting. I knew he didn't have the money for it. I also knew where some of that money was coming from. My parents were still bankrolling him, even while they begged me in voicemails to pick up their calls. And through it all, I remained silent. 2 weeks after the birthday party, my father finally showed up at my apartment. It was a Saturday morning. I heard the knock on my door and knew instantly who it was. For a long moment, I considered not answering. But curiosity won out. I opened the door to see Richard Carter, the man who had called me a failure in front of everyone, standing there, looking older than I'd ever seen him. His shoulders slumped, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. For the first time in my life, he didn't look untouchable. He looked human. "Michael," he said. Just my name. No anger, no booming voice. Just tired. I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit. He paced, ran a hand through his thinning hair, muttered under his breath. Finally, he stopped and looked at me. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded," he said. "At the party. It was supposed to be a joke. Maybe it went too far. But you shouldn't have left like that." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." His jaw tightened. For a moment, the old pride flashed in his eyes, but then it faded. He sighed, sat down heavily on the couch, and put his face in his hands. "You don't understand," he said. "Things aren't good right now. I'm under a lot of pressure. I didn't mean to take it out on you." There was. I wanted to ask, pressure from what? From the debts I used to pay? From the bills I used to cover? But I bit my tongue. Instead, I let him talk. He rambled about the economy, about bad investments, about how Andrew's latest business venture had eaten up more money than expected. He talked about taxes, about creditors, about temporary setbacks. But beneath the excuses, I heard the truth. He was drowning. And for the first time in my life, he needed me. The irony was almost too much to bear. The man who had never once acknowledged my worth now stood in my living room, desperate for my help. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just listened. When he left, I closed the door and sat in silence, the weight of years pressing down on me. I could feel it. The tide was turning. My father's pride was unraveling, Andrew's facade was crumbling, and for the first time, the invisible sun held all the cards. And I wasn't done being silent. Not yet. The weeks after my father came to my apartment were the quietest I had ever experienced in my life. Not outwardly, my phone still buzzed, my email still filled with family messages, and word trickled through cousins and neighbors about how things at the Carters' house weren't going well. But in my own world, I felt a calm I'd never known before. For years, I had been the silent safety net, the hidden rescuer. Every time they stumbled, I was there to catch them. But for the first time, I let them fall. And the silence that followed was deafening. By the third week, news reached me that the family's lake cabin had been sold. My father hadn't told me himself, of course. Pride would never allow that. But my aunt mentioned it casually on the phone, her tone tinged with shock. "Your dad loved that cabin," she said. "I never thought I'd see the day he let it go." The day after that, I got another call, this one from a family friend who worked in real estate. She said she'd heard whispers that my parents were considering selling the house. The house. The one I had saved from foreclosure 3 separate times. The one they had nearly lost if not for me. And Andrew? He was spiraling. His flashy dinners and vacations had slowed, replaced with desperate social media posts about new ventures and investment opportunities. Translation: he was broke. The cracks had widened into chasms, and for the first time, my father's kingdom was collapsing. Still, I stayed silent. Until the night everything came crashing down. It was a Thursday evening when my phone rang again. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me knew to answer. "Michael?" a voice asked, shaky and low. It was my mother. "Please, can you come? It's your father," I drove to their house. The same house I had kept alive with my money, my sacrifices, my invisible presence. When I walked through the door, the sight stopped me cold. My father sat in his recliner, hunched forward, his hands trembling as he held a stack of papers. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. For a moment, I didn't see the booming, proud man who had always towered over me. I saw someone broken. He looked up at me, and I'll never forget the words that came out of his mouth. "Michael, I need your help." Not a joke. Not a command. Not said with arrogance. A plea. I stepped closer, took the papers from his hand, and scanned them. Overdue notices. Collection threats. Tax liens. Even the mortgage was behind again. All of it, the same cycle I had stopped time and again. But this time, I hadn't lifted a finger. And now it was too late for him to hide it. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. Because I thought I could handle it. I thought Andrew's project would take off. I thought. "Andrew." I cut him off. "You gave Andrew money again?" He looked away. That was all the answer I needed. I laughed bitterly. "Of course you did. And now you're here, asking for help from your failure of a son." His head snapped up, shame flashing in his eyes. For once, he didn't have a comeback. I set the papers down on the table between us. My mother hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands, whispering prayers under her breath. The silence stretched until it felt like the air was going to shatter. Finally, I said, "Do you even know how many times I saved you? How many times I covered your bills, paid off your debts, kept this house from being taken?" His mouth opened, closed. He shook his head slowly. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't," I said. "Because you never asked. You never cared. You were too busy praising Andrew, too busy calling me a disappointment, too busy humiliating me in front of 50 people. The memory of that night burned hot in my chest, but this time, the shame wasn't mine. It was his. He bowed his head. I was wrong. Those 3 words. From Richard Carter, the man who had never admitted fault in his life. And for a fleeting second, I almost broke. I almost gave in, almost became the safety net again. But then I remembered every sleepless night, every time I opened my bank account to see thousands gone, every mocking laugh at the dinner table when I was brushed off as nothing. I stood tall. "I'm not your solution anymore." His eyes widened. "Michael, please. You can't just let us." I held up a hand. "Do you remember what you called me? At your birthday party?" He winced. "You called me a failure. In front of everyone. You made me a joke." I leaned in close, my voice steady, cold. "Well, failures don't save families. Remember? You taught me that." He stared at me, speechless. My mother gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. I turned, walked to the door, and without looking back, I said the words that sealed it. "This time, you can fall without me." And then I left. The weeks that followed were brutal for them. The house went on the market. The whispers in the family turned into full-blown gossip. Andrew disappeared from social media, too ashamed to face the fallout. Relatives who once laughed with my father now whispered behind his back about his poor decisions. And me? Thrived. What no one knew, not even my father, was that while I had been paying their debts for years, I had also been building something of my own. I had invested wisely, started a small business on the side, grown it slowly, steadily. By the time my father's empire crumbled, mine had already risen. I bought a new place, hired employees, lived the life I had built with my own hands, no one else's approval required. Word spread eventually. Relatives who had once brushed me off began to whisper my name differently. "Michael's done well for himself," they'd say. "Michael's smart. Michael's stable." But I didn't care about their recognition anymore. The only validation I ever wanted had already been denied too many times to matter now. My father tried to call again, months later. This time, I didn't answer. Not out of anger, but because I had finally understood something. My silence wasn't just revenge. It was freedom. I didn't need to scream the truth. I didn't need to prove myself anymore. Because in the end, he had destroyed himself. All I had to do was stop saving him. Sometimes, revenge isn't about fire and fury. It isn't about shouting the truth or proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. Sometimes, the sharpest revenge is silence. For years, my father called me a failure. But when the walls closed in, it wasn't the golden sun he turned to. It was me. And when I finally refused, when I let the weight of his choices fall where it belonged, I stopped being the failure. I became the one thing he never expected. The man who walked away. And sometimes, that's the greatest revenge of all.